All right, welcome everyone. Great. Thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Megan Schmidt. I'm the programs developer here at the National Bicycle Dealers Association. Wanted to welcome everyone and thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. We're excited to have an excellent panel today of Canadian bicycle retailers, industry partners, and advocacy leaders joining us from across the country. So the NBDA is stepping into Canadian advocacy in a bigger, more coordinated way, truly because the moment demands it. So today's retailers are navigating real and growing challenges, including safety standards, evolving regulations, insurance considerations, infrastructure needs, and truly just maintaining consumer confidence and engagement in our rapidly changing market. So right now, the retailer's voice is critical. Decisions being made today around e-mobility, housing access, transport, and safety are directly affecting how bike shops are operating and how customers are experiencing cycling in their communities tomorrow. We've learned that fragmented efforts do not get us where we need to go. Progress happens when retailers, advocates, standards organizations, and industry partners are working together in the same room with shared goals and clear communication. This conversation, this webinar, this meeting today does not stand alone. It is the start of a larger intentional roadmap, and we're truly glad you are all part of this today. So before we dive into today's discussion, a quick note, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website following. And we do have a chat and Q&A feature. We have a really robust schedule today, so we don't have dedicated time for Q&A. But if you're watching today, please feel free to drop a comment, question into the chat or Q&A, and our panelists can answer that if time allows, whether it might be a response back to you or if it's something we can address aloud. So before we dive into today's discussion with our panelists, I just wanted to take a little bit of a moment to explain why the NBDA is leading this initiative and why now. So at its core, the NBDA exists to connect the dots in our industry. And we sit at the intersection of bicycle retailers, policymakers, safety and standards organizations, insurers, and industry partners. It's a complex landscape, and this position gives us a unique responsibility and opportunity to bring people together in a way that works for retailers. So, kind of framing the time, over the past several years, Canadian retailers have been very clear with us. They're asking for more clarity in a complex regulatory environment. They're asking for stronger advocacy and representation, and they're asking for practical tools, not theory, to help them navigate everyday safety, insurance, infrastructure, and emerging technology like e-mobility. These are questions coming through the door every single day. And advocacy cannot live in a silo or a vacuum if it doesn't align with the realities of running a bike shop. Again, diverse, it's managing risk, it's serving customers, training staff, and protecting margins. It's not something that can be easily fit into that retailer's role. So, our goal here at the NBDA is to make sure advocacy supports your business, not complicates it. And that's why this initiative is bringing together all of these wonderful industry partners who we'll introduce in a moment at the same table. Clear standards build consumer confidence, smart incentives drive adoption, and consistent, well understood regulations across provinces reduce confusion and risk for everyone involved. So, again, our goal is to give retailers a voice and an active role in sharing trusted expertise to always make sure that their experience, their knowledge, and their concerns and goals are considered in regulation, in infrastructure, in all of these big decisions. And our goal is to create alignment across the industry so that Canadian cycling can grow safely, sustainably, and profitably. So, again, that's why we're here, and that's why this work matters now. So, this initiative is built as a five-part series that begins with this webinar and culminates with two in-person days at the NBDA Canadian Retailer Summit in July 2026. So each session is designed to stand on its own, but also build toward deeper collaboration and action. So I wanted to just give a quick snapshot of what we have coming up after today's session. April 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern, we have our second webinar in the series, Powering Forward Safely, Battery Safely and Responsible Battery Safety, and Responsible Recycling. So this session is going to focus on e-mobility battery safety, certification standards, fire prevention, responsible recycling, and bringing together UL solutions, Call to Recycle, and advocacy partners and industry experts in this conversation. On May 22nd, also at 1 p.m. Eastern, we have Building Better Routes, Safe Transportation, and Class Systems. So we're going to dig into active transport planning, e-bike class systems, federal advocacy efforts like Bike Day on the Hill, and funding opportunities that will directly impact cycling infrastructure. And lastly, on June 19th for our webinars, also at 1 p.m. Eastern, we'll close this series with Bringing Bikes Home, Dwelling Access and Insurance Solutions. This conversation will focus on multi-unit dwelling access, bike storage policies, insurance considerations for retailers and consumers, and fire safety. So kind of that conversation that comes along with the first bike purchase, right? Taking it home, making sure you're safe and kind of within your rights in place to, have that e-bike in your dwelling. And this all leads us to July 29th and 30th, where we come together in person at the NBDA Canadian Retailer Summit. This is going to be in Whistler. Every webinar presenter is invited to attend, present, and engage today. So this will take education into action, in-person deep dive sessions, collaborative workshops with our partners, and an empowered community that is going to bring visibility and real action to this work we're doing together. And that's not the end, right? That's the end of our series that we have scheduled, but advocacy is ongoing and is on the front of our radar for this year. The relationships, tools, and momentum that we're building through this series will continue well beyond the summit in July. So today is about setting the foundation, starting the conversation, getting to know everyone in this room, and what we're going to keep building over the coming months. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our panel and begin today's discussion here. All right, so I'm going to go around the room and would love to just have everyone introduce themselves and kind of give us a quick overview of who you are in the industry and what your role is. So Navdeep, I'm going to start with you. Navdeep China, Director of Campaigns and Inclusion at Hub Cycling. Welcome, Navdeep, and thanks for being here. If you could introduce yourself and your role.
Absolutely. And I'd like to begin with a brief acknowledgement. Upcycling is based in Vancouver on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm immigrant to these lands, and today I am actually joining from my ancestral homeland in Chandigarh, India. So I'm very lucky to be joining a great group of people today. At Hub Cycling, we work to make cycling safer, accessible, and more inclusive across British Columbia. This includes advocating for local infrastructure, helping build more protected bike lanes and connected networks. But we also aspire to enact change across the province. As part of our policy work, we focus on things like Motor Vehicle Act reforms, provincial budgets, and provincial election platforms. These provincial decisions shape speed limits across the province, funding allocations, road design standards, and ultimately safety outcomes for all vulnerable road users. That includes people walking, people cycling, and even people using wheelchairs. For retailers, this matters more than what it might seem. When provincial policy supports safer streets and sustained infrastructure investment, cycling becomes a more reliable transportation choice. That stability increases readership, builds consumer confidence, and creates stronger long-term demands for local bike shops. So advocacy isn't separate from retail. It helps create a condition where cycling can grow safely and sustainability, and so can the cycling industry.
Awesome. Navdeep, thank you for centering that and that acknowledgement. And the scope of what you're doing is immense. So we're really excited to learn more. Thank you. And welcome, Jamie Stuckless, owner and principal consultant at Stuckless Consulting. Jamie, thank you for being here. Can you tell us more about yourself and the work that you do?
Great. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Jamie Stuckless, and for the last 5 years, I've been an independent active transportation consultant at Stuckless Consulting Inc., where I do a lot of work directly with municipalities, developing active transportation plans, municipal or micromobility strategies, and doing research that ultimately informs a lot of municipal bylaws. So engage that way on the kind of electric micromobility file. And prior to my time as a consultant, I spent just over 10 years in the nonprofit sector working on active school travel, but also spent 6 years leading provincial advocacy for cycling in Ontario and working quite closely with the provincial government and Ministry of Transportation here in Ontario. So bringing a little bit of the private consultant and nonprofit advocacy perspective to the table.
Let's bring it a lot together. Thanks so much, Jamie. And Lucas Biffert, welcome, account executive at Hub International. If you could introduce yourself and a little bit about what Hub International does.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Megan. So yeah, I'm based in Vancouver, working at Hub International. So we do commercial insurance, home insurance, employee benefits, all the above for businesses all across Canada and North America. So I guess the States as well. And I've been doing this for a little over 3 years now. Before that, I worked in a number of bike shops kind of through university. And yeah, I guess more personally, I focus quite a bit on Canadian bike shops here in Canada. So I work with a lot of shop owners all across Canada, just kind of working through their current risk management plans and helping to provide them with a little bit more tailored solutions.
Awesome. Yeah, I know we've spoken before, and I know you have a lot of insight to share in that category. So thank you so much. And next up, welcome Samuel Benoit, Executive Director of Velo Canada Bikes. If you could share a bit more about your position there and the work that Velo Canada Bikes does.
Thank you, Megan, for bringing us together. So I'm Samuel. I'm the Executive Director for Velo Canada Bikes. We're Canada's national voice for everyday cycling. I used to work in the bike retail industry. I used to operate a bike shop here in Ottawa, surrounded by bikes and mechanics and the smell of bike grease. But now I work here in my basement, writing endless reports and emails and sitting in meetings about bikes. But sometimes I get to ride my bike downtown to meet with a politician to talk about bikes, and that's always very exciting. And I'll go more into some of the stuff we do later in the conversation.
That's awesome. Great to have the retailers in the room. I love it. I know what you mean about missing the bike shop vibe every day. Awesome. Thank you. And David McKnight, Vice President of Government Relations and Partnerships at UL Standards and Engagement. Pleasure to have you here today. If you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks so much for having us. So, UL Standards and Engagement is a nonprofit standards development and safety advocacy organization working towards a safer world. So, for over 126 years, we've been developing consensus-based safety standards. And about 4 years ago, we added the word engagement to our name to talk about the impact that they have on public safety and policy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And John McQuaid, VP of Marketing and Communications at Call to Recycle. Thank you also for being here. If you could share a bit about your role at Call to Recycle and the work you're doing.
Thank you for having us. Call to Recycle is Canada's leading battery collection and recycling organization. We're a not-for-profit organization, and that's our mission to collect and recycle as many batteries as possible, especially in the e-bike, e-scooter, hoverboard, and e-skateboard sector. We've been around this is our 30th year as a not-for-profit organization, and we've responsibly collected and recycled over 60 million kilograms in that time. And it matters for retailers because our e-mobility collection program provides retail shops as a collection point for consumers for end-of-life batteries or any damaged, defective, recalled batteries. And we provide our partners with resources around safety and consumer awareness material to develop, distribute through their channels. So excited to be part of this. Thanks for having us.
Great. Thanks so much. And Rob McMonagle, committee member at the Canadian Bicycle Training Coalition. Welcome. If you could introduce yourself and more about what the coalition does.
Sure, and thank you very much for having me here. A little bit of background. First of all, my entire career has been in the green industries. I've, been in the private sector. I've been working as an NGO, and then the last 20 years in government. Okay. Started off in the renewable energy sector, where I was 20 years retailing, then the executive director of the Canadian Solar Industry Association, before moving over to the City of Toronto, where I was a senior advisor for the green economy. So during the time at the city, we were starting to look at the bike industry starting the pandemic. Okay, and we identified a lot of basic industry structural problems related to the lack of statistics and lack of training. So I left the city last year to carry on some advocacy at a variety of different renewable energy or variety of green energy or green technologies, bicycles being one of them. And we're looking at, how do we advocate to come up with a proper training process for bike mechanics in Canada.
Awesome. Great to hear that, Rob. Thank you. And Zoe Crutchen, welcome, bicycle mechanic and researcher in the bicycle industry. If you could tell us more about the work you do.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm Zoe. I've been in the bicycle industry for over 13 years. I've worked as a bicycle mechanic in both for-profit and non-for-profit bike shops, including helping manage a community bike shop in Vancouver. I've also worked as an advocate internationally for the European Cyclist Federation in Brussels on knowledge mobilization through their Velo City Conference series, and more recently undertaken some research on bicycle mechanics as a skilled trade in Vancouver, BC, and now across Canada alongside some other folks in Ontario and Quebec, including Rob. Yeah, I'm passionate about bicycle mechanics, about workers' rights, as well as repairability and the right to repair. So happy to be here and be part of the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Zoe. Thanks so much, everyone. I feel like we could probably spend 15 minutes on everyone's introduction just because the scope of the work you're doing is powerful and impressive. So our next portion, we'll dive a little more into that and kind of tying together how your work is impacting or involving local retailers and cycling communities. So Navdeep, I'll put you up first again here. So hub cycling works as at the intersection of advocacy and inclusion. You're doing a lot of powerful work. And can you kind of tie in for us how that work directly impacts, let's say, local retailers and retailers across Canada?
100%, yes. So Megan, when we build safe and connected infrastructure, ridership follows, and that has a direct retail impact. At the local level, protected and connected networks reduce the intimidation factor. They make cycling more practical and safe for people of all ages and abilities, for families, for mothers riding with their children, for seniors, for commuters, and not just the confident riders. That broadens the customer base and increases the frequency of riding, which supports service industry, the service revenue, and repeat visits. But what's equally important is the provincial layer. When the provincial governments commit funding through their budgets or through updating legislations like Motor Vehicle Act reform in British Columbia, or prioritize the vulnerable road user safety, which includes people walking, people cycling, people using wheelchairs, and a broad spectrum of people. That creates consistency across municipality. It signals that cycling isn't just a temporary pilot in big urban markets like Vancouver, but it is a part of the transportation system that our provincial government is prioritizing across the province. For retailers, that policy stability builds consumer confidence. Customers are more willing to invest in a bike, especially high value bikes like e-scooters or even e-bikes, when they see long-term infrastructure and legal protection in place. So advocating for infrastructure is not just about building more bike lanes. It's about predictability, it's about safety, it's about confidence. And all those things strengthen local bike businesses.
Excellent. I love that, again, kind of recentering on the broader scope, because it can be difficult to step outside your shop and think, I ride here every day. It is what it is, or the bike lane is okay, but truly looking at that rider that is not the confident rider, someone who we're welcoming in and wanting to feel confident is so important. So thank you for that overview. And next question here is for Jamie. So with spending as much time as you do in the policy and regulatory worlds, can you kind of wrap like why provincial policy matters so much to bicycle retailers?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. And I ultimately got involved in policy because of my desire to ride a bike more and just trying to do that and experiencing all of the different ways that local, provincial, and federal policy were just making that harder than it needed to be. So that's really how I got involved in policy. And, specifically now for the last few years, just seeing the really exciting role that I think e-bikes can play in expanding mobility and helping more people get around. So yeah, that's led to me spending a lot of time reading policy documents, which is a life choice I will question at a different time. But in terms of, the role of provincial policy and what that means for bicycle retailers, I think, Navdeep really touched on kind of some of that provincial role for cycling overall. I think maybe if I could speak a little bit specifically about e-bikes, I think there's a really important thing going on there for bicycle retailers at the provincial level. And, right now, most e-bike decisions are being made by the provinces, and
Right.
that's a direct result of the federal definition download that happened in 2021 that I think Samuel will probably talk a little bit about. But provinces and territories are ultimately responsible for defining what an e-bike is and what their user requirements are. And outside of e-bikes, that's the case for bicycles in general. So, it's just really important that retailers understand what those requirements are. And I think, just for three specific reasons that I'll outline quickly. One, it really impacts what types of bicycles and e-bikes are legal to use in the community. And I think it's important and often overlooked for retailers to know that, particularly because it can vary so much from community to community, province to province. It's important for retailers to do that work and understand what is legal to use where in their community. And that's because of the second reason I wanted to highlight that I think retailers are often people's first and sometimes only source about
Yeah.
cycling and e-biking in their community. It can be really hard to understand what the rules are, really hard to find local information about cycling rules and e-bikes, particularly now, if you just do a Google search, you're not
Yeah.
guaranteed to get information about what is permitted in your specific community. So retailers really are that front line for many people. And I think many people, myself included, would go into a bike shop with a similar understanding that if I went into a car dealership, I don't have to ask which one of these bikes are legal for me to ride or which
Right.
one of these cars is legal for me to ride on the road. You just assume they all are. That's honestly not the case for some of the e-bikes being sold in bike shops. And we shouldn't be expecting consumers to come in with that mindset of, okay, I have to ask you where I can ride this e-bike. And I've been involved in a couple of, upsetting incidents for people where they've bought e-bikes locally and then been told you actually can't ride it on that trail. You can't ride it on this piece of infrastructure. And those folks have ended up, in the media and in front of council being like, I bought this e-bike to ride on the waterfront trail and now you're telling me that I can't. So I think there's a lot of, opportunity there for retailers to help reduce that friction. And then lastly, I also just wanted to highlight the opportunity for bicycle retailers to be involved in that provincial development of the rules. I've had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of those consultations, and oftentimes the retailer and manufacturer voice is missing. And it really just means that people are making decisions without understanding, technical specs of these devices and maybe coming up with specifications and regulations that inadvertently ban certain types of bikes or make it harder to ride one way or another, or even to enforce the rules that we come up with or communicate about them. So I think there's kind of that push-pull tension where some need for retailers to better understand the regulatory environment, but also the opportunity to be more involved in the regulatory making, because I think that would lead to better policy overall.
Absolutely. And better conversations with customers when they understand the involvement and it's not this policy that's a surprise. It's a hard conversation. I like that you brought that up of, yeah, having to be that first touch point, maybe the only that a customer gets about whether they already own the e-bike or they're purchasing one. It's maybe a newer conversation for many because we normally don't need to talk about, non-e-bikes generally and their legal access, but even passive information, like I know we've had a lot of different great ideas from retailers and brands as well of just like flyers in the store, handouts, dedicated spaces on your website that show you're connecting and, kind of getting ahead of that conversation to make people also feel comfortable and confident. I love that. Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. And kind of changing the conversation a little bit. This question's for Lucas. So insurance. that is a pretty big, complex, and can be like a reactive feeling decision for retailers to make. Suffice to say, it's probably one of the more difficult things to really understand exactly what we need as retailers and what we need to focus on. So, can you explain how the insurance fits in today's, evolving risk landscape for bike shops? Like, where should we focus on? What are the main concerns to understand that we're covered and kind of proactive on?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an ever-changing landscape, as you mentioned, and it's something that's needing kind of, I don't want to say constant attention, but I mean, for a lot of bike shop owners, it's something you probably feel like you deal with it once a year and kind of just hope you're never going to need it. And it's definitely not the fun part of running a business. But I mean, the reality is bike shops carry serious risks, and I mean, there's a lot of things with higher value e-bike inventory. Bike values as a whole are just continually going up. Work, like repair work, rentals, demo rides, community events. There's a lot of different things that kind of go on in a bike shop nowadays, and a generic retail policy just really doesn't cover everything the way you'd expect it to.
Right.
Which is kind of, I guess, a different approach that I have when working with bike shops. I really try to help them to actually understand what they currently have, and more importantly, what they don't have, and then see if we can kind of find areas where they're underinsured and help kind of fill those gaps in coverage, so that hopefully, if there is, or hopefully they don't have a claim, but if there is a claim, they are actually covered for it, and kind of have a bit more of a consultant approach to the brokering of their policy.
Great. Yeah, kind of making that more of a conversation. And not to put you on the spot, Lucas, but what would you say is the main, kind of area or category that you've seen retailers maybe be undereducated on as far as insurance coverage goes, or something you're kind of continually reaching out about?
Um, Areas they're under. I mean, insurance is just not a simple topic. There's so many
Right.
different lines of coverage, and there's so many different forms of each line of coverage to kind of understand. So I'd say, by and large, they could really benefit from kind of a kind of sit down Zoom call conversation and go through their policy all the way. Business interruptions, always a tough one. It's one of the more complicated ones, and a big exposure for all bike shops, especially if you own the building that you're in. There's a lot of different approaches to insuring shops. When you have an operation and building ownership, they're usually in different entities. And I've seen a few this year even that have just been grossly underinsured, or even no business interruption on the actual building, and they just assume that the operations business interruption will cover it, when often cases it won't. Indemnity periods are just never long enough. Property of others is another big one. We see a lot of policies come in, well, they may even specify a limit for property of others, but what they really need is bailees coverage, which is legal liability for the property of others and their
Okay.
care, custody, control. And I mean, a lot of bike shops have 50, 100, maybe even $200,000 of customer bikes at any one time. And I mean, that would be a dramatic loss if there was to be a fire, and that's just completely uninsured. And I mean,
Yeah.
at first glance, it may look like it's covered, but it's not when you kind of dig into the wordings a little bit more.
Great. Yeah, that's a great point, especially heading into the height of repair season shortly. I appreciate that perspective. Thanks, Lucas. And now to jump in the back on the topic of advocacy, this question is for you, Samuel. Velo Canada operates at a national level, but can you kind of give more background to your organization's mission and how you see national advocacy connecting back to the success of local bike shops?
I want to build a little bit on what Navdeep brought up earlier. We share a particular perspective on what would be the biggest barrier to getting more customers into this industry. We don't think that retailers' biggest competition is necessarily one another or price or other recreation activities. We think that the biggest barrier to growing this industry is the legitimate concerns that so many Canadians have that they might get hit by a car while they're out riding their bikes.
Yeah.
So, and actually, according to a big poll that CAA did in 2020, 31% of Canadians said that they would cycle more if infrastructure was better. And in that survey, they categorized the respondents, and there was a category of people who don't currently cycle often, and 40% of them said that they would actually cycle if they had access to bike lanes that separated them with barriers from other forms of traffic.
Wow.
So our mission, the mission of Velo Canada Bikes and the mission of a lot of other groups in the space is to build bicycle-friendly communities. We're working at a national scope, and to follow the evidence on what's going to make that happen. A big focus of ours has always been on infrastructure. And there's another elephant in the room in our country that we should mention while we're together, and it's the phenomenon that a lot of us are calling bike lash. And it's this phenomenon that it's threatening to stop and even reverse progress on infrastructure in some communities. And to give some examples, everybody knows about the moves that Premier Doug Ford has been doing in Ontario to remove some bike lanes from Toronto and to prevent the construction of bike lanes across the province. And we're also seeing some threats on bike lanes in Edmonton, in Halifax, in Montreal, a cut in funding in British Columbia. So what we think this is coming from is some politicians capitalizing on common misunderstandings among voters on what are the true causes of traffic congestion. And they're using that as a wedge issue to kind of bring people on side, sometimes to distract voters from other issues and failures on their part. So we're working on that as well. And there's also the challenge with e-bikes that Jamie mentioned. And there's a lot of, I want to propose something to everybody here. There's a lot of stories that come out about people getting hurt with e-bikes, but I want to propose that we help reframe the conversation and the discourse in Canada and help people understand that what we're usually talking about in those incidents are actually something that we could call e-motos. It's another category of vehicles that don't actually meet the definition of e-bikes. And like Jamie said, are usually not even, legal on public roads. And that require a different regulatory framework than from electrically assisted bicycles. So anyways, Velo Canada Bikes, we engage in federal lobbying, knowledge mobilization, and we support the grassroots bike advocacy community. And I'll go into more detail on the lobbying work later on.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for that overview. And yeah, I like that question of asking everyone in the group here. I think that's a great starting point. David, next question is for you. With UL standards and engagement known globally for safety standards, why are safety standards now becoming such a critical issue in cycling and e-mobility?
So that's a great question. And so at ULSC, my team educates and advocates for the role of safety standards in mitigating risk, protecting communities, and supporting innovation in industry. And our work in micromobility advocacy initially grew out of the need to respond to the rampant battery fires happening in New York City. And the initial response was going to be banning e-mobility devices. And so we worked very closely with FDNY, the New York City Council, other key stakeholders, including the bike industry, to introduce Local Law 39, which passed in 2023. And that law required any micromobility device sold, leased, or rented in New York City to be certified to our standards. And since passing, fire-related deaths from lithium-ion batteries has drastically decreased. And our e-mobility standards, which are 2271, 2272, and 2849, are binational with Canada and have been recognized by industry, government, and policymakers as a critical tool in mitigating this risk from e-mobility fires. And so some examples of what these standards cover: construction and performance requirements, energy storage assemblies and battery management systems. And the testing simulates normal and abnormal use, foreseeable misuse, such as being dropped or overcharging. And I'll dive more into the advocacy piece later, but 6 states and multiple cities now require UL standards as part of law or legislation. And we're working with the fire service, bike industry, and a number of safety advocates to push for a federal law in the United States, which actually passed the House and is on its way to the Senate, they would also require CPSC to use our standards as final consumer product safety standards. And so how do we take this knowledge and this impact and share this particularly with those in Canada and elsewhere to really drive impact and safety?
Excellent. Thanks so much, David. And I know we have on our website too, on the NBDA advocacy drop down, a safety pledge for both retailers and brands for adopting these standards. So I appreciate the overview of, kind of where that's at on kind of the scale for both the Canada and the US. But if you haven't visited that part of our website, we'll drop that link in the chat later too. And yeah, I appreciate the background there. Thanks, David. And John, next question is for you, kind of along the same lines of battery safety and battery recycling, for Call to Recycle. Can you tell us more about what your organization does? I'd love to hear more too. If like a retailer is not involved, how can they get involved? And why this matters so much? Like why are retailers kind of the front lines of something that they haven't really been responsible for, the end of life parts before?
Yeah, so our program around, mitigating safety risks, I'd say we focus on three things: awareness, training, and collection solutions for our e-bike collection partners. So, of course, we focus on the end of life management because that's our mission, to collect and recycle as many batteries. We on our awareness and training, we focus on the responsible purchasing and storage management, but our program provides retail partners with collection container solutions and resources so these bike shop partners can accept from the riders at end of life. So on containers, we provide specialized UN-rated, prepaid, pre-addressed fire retardant e-mobility battery shipping boxes. Our regular box holds 3 e-bike batteries for end of life. But we also provide damaged, defective, recalled collection solution kits as well. We have two options. We have a 7-gallon DDR kit, but we could also provide our retail shops with a 55-gallon DDR kit that can hold a lot more e-bike batteries. And if you're part of our Recycle Your Batteries Canada program, there's no charge to the retail collection partners. It's an easy online ordering portal system. And then the other benefit is the training that we provide online to our retail partners. We have an account management team that does some in-field training as well. And then the third is we provide awareness tools, right, to our bike collection partners for the cycling community. And we do awareness campaigns. So we have a bike tag, hang tags, we have posters, we have training kits, we have a bunch of resources that our partners can distribute to their consumers and to their shoppers and just get the awareness out around, how to identify a damaged, defective battery and what to do at end of life, but also responsible management and storage.
Awesome. Yeah, keeping that battery from maybe being a DDR battery at some point. I'm sure we've all heard recently some smaller or larger event that, yeah, kind of enhances that problem. So thank you so much, John. And I'm sure we'll drop in before the end of this Call to Recycle Canada's information if you're a retailer that is not yet connected. Great. And Rob, I would love to kind of focus this back onto workforce recognition and it's really the labor of the Canadian bicycle industry. So this question is for you on if you could just kind of share an overview of your top priorities of the work that you're doing,
Sure.
involve that.
And it's kind of a complex multi-stage process. Okay. So we've heard, repeatedly that there's a global shortage in the bike industry of trained and skilled bike mechanics. You look at the work that Shimano Europe's been doing. You look at the media that all the magazines are covering. And if we're face a similar situation in Canada, okay, and the work that I had done in Toronto with the bike retailers in Toronto all indicated that they've got a serious problem of attracting people into the industry and then having to train those people themselves. So, how do we do that at a national level? Well, you need that government funding, okay, to develop training programs. Well, government funding depends on how many people are employed, how many people are you going to train. We lack all that information. So we're back into how do we collect the information? And it's, well, you got to get listed in the National Occupation Classification System. We're the only G7 country that doesn't list bicycle mechanics as an occupation. So as a consequence, there's no statistics. We don't know how many people are employed. We don't know how many people are hired. We don't know what the wages are. All these things are needed, okay, to develop a training program. Not only that, okay, if you want to attract workers, they want to know what the salaries are. Okay. Lack of information. So a lot of the stuff, revolves around, okay, we got to start at the basics, okay, get ourselves listed in the National Occupation Code, start collecting the data so that then we have the information that we can go for government funding, we can work with colleges and training institutions, we can start attracting people into the industry.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And next question for Zoe. What led you to focus specifically on workforce issues within the bicycle industry? Appreciate your background there and kind of where do you see maybe this, kind of affecting the most people within the industry?
Sure. Yeah, I think it'll become clear that Rob and I are working hand in hand on this stuff. But yeah, I've seen firsthand the issues that both workers and employers face due to a range of factors that compound each other, and have been researching and discussing this stuff with folks in the industry for over 4 years. So some of these factors for both parties are lack of training, lack of standards in the industry, new products to contend with micromobility, affordability and housing issues in major cities, direct to consumer bike sales, discrimination from both colleagues and customers, ergonomic and safety issues, retention issues. The list goes on. There's so many different pressures on retailers, and specifically within the repair center of a bike shop. I think employee turnover is really costly, and it's getting even costlier when we take into account how complex our industry has become and the steepness of the learning curve for the average mechanic. So there's opportunity to do things differently. We know different countries and regions are doing things differently. To have both employers and workers be better supported, create safer environments for workers to thrive, and hopefully stay in the profession long term. I think if we make some positive changes, we could see safer, more efficient, and affordable repairs that benefit the cyclist, so the customer, and retailers' bottom line in the long run. If folks can't get their brakes safely fixed at a reasonable price with a reasonable turnaround time, how can we ask them to rely on and invest in their bike for transportation and recreation? And on the flip side, if a retailer could have access to well-trained, efficient mechanics, in what ways could that positively impact their business?
Great. That's a fantastic perspective to kind of bring it back around to. And so if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of jump a little bit ahead, but ask about the national survey, maybe the next thing you were going to focus on as well, about the workforce challenges. So can you kind of share like what is the scope of this survey, what it will uncover, and kind of the next steps once the data is collected?
Sure. So Rob kind of mentioned, but we had sort of in parallel been researching and discussing with various government agencies in BC and Quebec and Ontario, and also with StatScan. And basically, we don't have the data to take any next steps because we don't really collect data on bicycle mechanics. So we've created a group to take on that challenge, and are building a bicycle mechanic workforce challenges survey. We're creating the survey to understand those challenges for both the employer and the employees in the industry. So by that, we mean bicycle mechanics and people who hire bicycle mechanics. We want a baseline understanding of the profession as it stands in Canada today. And we're also really specifically trying to understand that skill acquisition and training aspect. It's a way for us to build engagement. Hopefully people see the survey questions and it sparks interest to learn more and engage with this work. The next steps are really going to depend on what we learn.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely be hopeful that we can kind of boost that out as well, and keep touch on, sharing that out as best we can. We'd love to help there too.
Yeah, maybe I can just add the survey will hopefully be released this March, as well as a launch of a website and more opportunities to engage with this work. So if there's folks on the call that are interested, Stay tuned for March, and I can also share my contact information if people have questions about the survey or the research directly.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm sure we can boost that out too. And Rob, do you have anything to add there, and maybe how retailers can access or mechanics can access or how they can kind of share with a network on this?
Yeah, so we're going to be working with a couple of the major, distributors of bicycles and bicycle parts. Okay, so they'll be getting it out to their networks. We'll be promoting this, through the magazines, that service the industry. We do have also an advocacy campaign. Okay, so I'll put in the link, okay, to that. So if people sign it for the advocacy campaign, they'll get the updated about when the survey comes out and stuff like that. We're also really interested in people getting involved on this. Okay, we're trying to make this a national initiative. If you're, passionate about training, a skilled professional bike industry, okay, reach out to Zoe or myself.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, we're excited to be involved in that as well and look forward to the results there. And I kind of wanted to broach the next question really about e-bike safety and regulation. So this will kind of be for Lucas, David, and John. Maybe specifically John for retailers facing risk. What do retailers like? What are they actually looking at if they're not handling battery recycling properly? If they say maybe they have an interface with Call to Recycle or it's just, something they maybe don't have a lot of knowledge on, haven't been exposed to, what kind of risk are they taking on by potentially keeping batteries in their store, maybe saying that they will, be a disposal site and, taking that next step to what they might think is proper disposal. If you can kind of expound on that at all, would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing is if you're not part of our collection network, I did throw in the chat the
Thank you.
website information as well as my information and my colleagues, Deb Poon, and we can set you up as a retail collection partner. And that's important because we provide the training and the resources to educate retail shops on what the risks are, and we know what the risks are. And the second thing is the proper compliant containers, right? So I mentioned we provide, 3 different versions of the collection containers that are UN certified, has a fire retardant liner. It complies to Transport Canada guidelines for safe shipping and handling. And then we also provide awareness tools for shoppers to come in. We have around proper management. So if your riders are coming in understanding proper charging techniques and not, follow the OEM manuals, everything like that. We have all these resources that our collection partners can have at no cost by being part of our program. And I think that's the key, right? Is having the right collection containers, whether it's an EOL end of life battery or a DDR damaged defective recalled battery. So we have the right solutions. If you need a large kit or a small kit, we can certainly provide our retail collection partners with that. So again, find out more at calltorecycle.ca. I did put in the link. There's an online form to become a collection partner if you're not already. And our team is happy to provide more information on the risk as well as, the proper solutions that we have in place.
Excellent. And maybe a follow-up question for, let's say we have a multi-store location or someone who just perhaps doesn't have those resources at hand when a customer comes in and says, hey, I have this battery. Maybe you're not even able to assess, is it a DDR level battery at that point? Would you have a suggestion of what they can tell that customer to do?
100%. So again, if you go to the website, we have, I'm looking at it right now, is like a training poster of how to identify an EOL battery versus how to identify a damaged defective battery. So that's a resource that, again, I can maybe put it in the link that can help if you're not part of our collection network, we do have the resources available on our website. So we have a DDR guideline sheet, rack cards that are available to consumers, a training poster. So certainly that can help. Again, just from an information education standpoint, those
Sure.
resources are available on the website, and I'll put a link in the chat.
Excellent. And I think what a lot of folks kind of mentioned too is this is the first time a lot of consumers are seeing this information. So yeah, maybe the first time is not going to be the full education, but it's any kind of passive notes you can have around the store as well as just clear, confident conversations are so helpful, along with having the tools for yourself too. And I will say it's very easy to access and get these resources by signing up with Call to Recycle, so don't hesitate. And my next question is for Lucas. I appreciate that you did not mention this as the first conversation about maybe the biggest insurance gap or concern or risk today. But for the concern of e-mobility and batteries in the business and kind of just even working on e-mobility products, what would you say that retailers might have gaps with today? Where might you encourage them to kind of focus on in, besides that full consultation, of course, with their insurance provider? Where would you tell them to kind of like look at first if they are servicing, selling e-mobility items?
Sorry, I guess I should
Oh, no
unmute.
worries. Sorry, Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, from an insurance perspective, the biggest concern is whether or not the insurance company understands the operations and knows what you guys are working on. So just making sure that there's kind of clarity there. Like you wouldn't want to be selling e-bikes if your insurance company doesn't know that you're selling e-bikes. You wouldn't want to be selling e-bikes that are maybe unbranded or imported from China if your insurance company doesn't know that you're doing it. And it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that if there was to be a claim and it's something that's going to be what we would consider a material factor, making a big impact on the risk, and the insurance company doesn't know about it, that's where something could get declined. We have solutions for pretty much any kind of business exposure. So it's not a concern there. You just want to make sure you have clarity with it. Anytime you're dealing with like the Specialized or the Treks or the Cervelos of the world, it's a much better risk from the perspective of the insurance company. There's rights of recourse against that company if something was to go wrong. The big issue is if you're selling brands that aren't necessarily don't have a North American presence. If the brands or the manufacturer is maybe from Asia or part of the world where we wouldn't have rights of recourse against them, then if you're the last person in the chain of commerce to kind of touch that bike or sell it or even service it, you're going to be held liable likely as the manufacturer, which of course is a very different exposure than someone who's just selling a Trek bike. Because obviously, if something was to go wrong, you might get named in the lawsuit, but the liability the negligence, if it's Trek's fault, is going to fall back on them. So it's just about kind of understanding, making sure that the insurance company has a good, clear understanding of what business operations you're doing. And then if there's a claim, there's no kind of confusion with what operations you guys have.
Great. Thank you. That's a great perspective too of like why we need to be super clear about what we're allowing into our shops, like what we're selling, what we're servicing. And sometimes it can be like, oh, maybe just this one or this customer needs to get to work. But yeah, it's so important to be super clear first with your insurance company and then with your in-store policies and staff. And this way you can feel confident with customers too. They obviously don't want to hear no, but they also don't want to hear an ambiguous answer. So yeah, thanks so much there, Lucas. And David, to kind of tie this together too, for clear standards and certification, how can that help retailers build trust with customers, whether they're purchasing a bike or bringing something in for service, instead of slowing down sales or kind of being that, you know, part of the conversation that might be difficult to have?
Yeah, so safety standards and certification help retailers build trust because they remove that uncertainty. It's important it's important to point out that a standard can only have its intended impact if it's certified by a tested laboratory or a qualified laboratory. So safety standards and certification go hand in hand. Certified products reduce business risk. Clear safety standards help prevent incidents, which protect staff, inventory, facilities, and reputation. But for retailers, trust is what closes that sale. And so when retailers can point to transparent safety practices and recognize standards, they reinforce their role as trusted advisors and not just sellers. So standards and certification don't slow sales, it speeds trust. And that trust is what hopefully keeps customers coming back. And so when retailers are engaged, safety standards don't necessarily live on paper, they change behavior, which leads to fewer incidents, stronger consumer confidence, and policies to protect communities without harming legitimate businesses.
Excellent. Yeah, and I will say it's sometimes a little bit as that, retailer, you almost feel like you're over educating or talking at the customer. So I would encourage everyone to like do role play in your shops if you have, morning meetings, which we encourage everyone to do in their businesses. Maybe just even role play some of these conversations. So you always feel confident talking about this is of the utmost importance, of course, but you feel like you're always empathizing with the customer, meeting them where they're at too, or where their bike might be at, and truly you're helping them be safe and make sure our communities are safe as well. So thanks for that perspective, David. And Navdeep, I would love to come back to kind of as we tie this conversation up today about improving cycling infrastructure and inclusivity in planning. How does that benefit bike shops? And maybe beyond that, how could bike retailers look to get involved or where to start?
Yes, a very important question. So research all across, and even the research we did at Hub Cycling, particularly our research on paddling towards equity, which looked at the Metro Vancouver cycling network and its accessibility, showed a clear gap. Many marginalized communities have the least access to connected, safe cycling infrastructure, and as a result, fewer nearby bike shops. So what's striking is that the same communities that are most likely to benefit from and rely on affordable transportation options have the least access. For many households facing cost pressures, cycling can directly help address affordability. These challenges like to transportation, that's one of the biggest concerns. A recent report published in Metro Vancouver showed that families are spending more than $10,000 a year to maintain just a single car. So if you think a family that has two cars, they are spending $20,000 a year just to afford that car. And cycling can help address that affordability. But without safe, connected routes and visible retail support, cycling doesn't feel like a realistic or supportive choice. So when we extend infrastructure into underserved neighborhoods, it unlocks a great big opportunity for retail. Cycling becomes practical for daily trips. It could be to your work, to your school, or even to run errands. And that practically drives consistent ridership. Consistent ridership translates into demand for more reliable bikes, more repair, more accessories, and service relationships. So for local bike shops, equity-focused infrastructure investment, it's not just about fairness and doing the right thing, but it's also a long-term market growth. It's for them to build a bigger client base. So expanding safe networks into communities where cost-effective mobility matters most can cultivate higher regular riders who depends upon their bikes and services from bike shops, and as a result can have a trusted relationship with these shops. So in short, closing the infrastructure gap doesn't just expand our networks and access to cycling. It actually strengthens the very foundation for sustainable, community-oriented bike businesses.
Love that. And beyond, right? It's such a great conversation to bring other small business owners into that conversation because we just see that, people want to be out more, people are using these routes and engaging at businesses and places they probably wouldn't get to or normally stop at in their vehicles. So I love that conversation. Just, yeah, the different places it can touch and positivity it can bring to the community. Awesome.
Yes, definitely. And some of the bike shops in Vancouver are actually becoming very creative in terms that they might have a coffee shop built into bike shop as well. So you are serving two needs.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you. And kind of to close out our conversation today, in looking forward, Jamie and Samuel, these questions are kind of for you both here. So I'd love to look at Jamie. Where do you see provinces making progress, and where are the biggest gaps? Where might we be focusing advocacy efforts in the near future?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question to kind of wrap things up. I think maybe right now it can feel a little bit hard to think about progress, as Samuel mentioned. There's been a lot of backlash at the provincial level in many places across Canada. But one of the ways that I try to think about it is that that backlash is because of the progress that has been made. We are seeing more riders. We are seeing more bike lanes. 10 years ago, there wasn't federal funding to cut. There wasn't provincial funding to cut. Now there is. Obviously, I don't want to see it cut and I don't want to see that bike lash happening, but sometimes it can help to step back in the broader picture of seeing that like we are making progress and that is what the pushback is too. I'd also say I get the opportunity to do a lot of community engagement, just like being at recreation centers, being at coffee shops, talking to people who aren't showing up to complain specifically about bikes. I'm just chatting to them like at the library on behalf of the municipality. There is a growing interest in bikes. I think that retailers are seeing that more people are buying bikes, so there is that growth, and I think it's important that we not let the political narrative overtake the reality on the ground that there is a lot of support for this, and we have to keep pushing forward. Obviously that does lead to some of the gaps that, as has been mentioned, just overall kind of a lack of funding and, the necessary infrastructure, as Navdeep was mentioning. And really, I think a lot of that comes down to oftentimes a narrow vision of mobility and seeing cycling as this nice to have that we'll fund when we have funding, as opposed to an essential mode of transportation that is making life easier and more affordable for families across the province. So I think that's the direction that we're really heading in. I'll just wrap up by touching on, a few of the other gaps related to e-bikes specifically, because I know that's one of the reasons I'm on the panel, but just, that ultimate gap that is existing in Canada right now, that individual definitions are being developed by each province. And I think that's a real issue for retailers to be aware of, because there is a real chance that what an e-bike is in Ontario is different than what an e-bike is in Quebec. So someone biking to work across that bridge in the morning could all of a sudden be riding an illegal e-bike. We see variations in the required age for riding an e-bike across Canada from 12 to 18. And we also see, changes like what happened in BC. Now in BC, if you have a throttle on your e-bike, that is specifically a different class of bike, which is something that's new, and not to like cast judgment on that one way or other, but that's something really important for retailers to be able to communicate to people buying a bike that, if you buy this bike with or without a throttle, that could mean a difference of how you can use it. So I think there's just a lot of inconsistencies out there now, and just kind of moving towards what I'm glad the NBDA is helping to convene those more consistent conversations, because it's not up to just one group or organization on this call to make that happen. We need to be moving together to share this information, and overcome some of these gaps as well as the overarching bike lash.
Awesome. Yeah, that's empowering. Thank you, Jamie. And let's look at like the federal government, kind of zoom out a little bit. This question for Samuel, looking at what municipalities and provinces are doing, and sometimes, kind of where those might not overlap, right? When an e-bike regulation can be different from, yeah, one side of the river to another. But looking at the federal government, what role is there for them to be enabling more cycling in Canada? Where do you see their role or their voice in this conversation?
Good question. Are we like out of time, basically?
We're closing in
Overtime?
on a little bit over the hour, but there's so much good stuff going on. Let's
Yeah.
put 5 more minutes to wrap up.
I'll try to condense it, but our organization started to get the federal government into the business of enabling cycling in 2012, and it took about a decade of advocacy and organizing and conferences and research that ultimately led to the federal government launching a strategy and a $400 million fund in 2021, and that was it was only 400 million. That's pennies for the federal government. But it was created because municipalities are tasked with so much in Canada, but they don't have the revenue base. So not just for cycling, but for a million other things, municipalities are always in the position of going to provinces and the federal government, to get the funding to do the services that their citizens need. So anyways, we made the case that cycling infrastructure should be one of those things. The fund was wildly popular. It got 3 billion in applications and was exhausted way ahead of its 5-year time period. And so we immediately began to advocate for its renewal. And that advocacy was successful. They announced that they had set aside another 500 million this time for the fund. at the end of 2024. And the Ministry of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities accepted applications from municipalities and First Nations. And now we're almost a year later, and those applications have yet to be approved. So why is that? The Prime Minister, we have a new Prime Minister since then. He launched a new budget in November, which implicated some changes to the way the federal government will support infrastructure projects. And we've followed that project, those funds all the way to the office of the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities, former Mayor of Vancouver, Gregor Robertson, and great mayor for cycling. And now he's in the ministry. Now he's the minister. So we're waiting on him to approve those applications, but there's some restructuring and streamlining going on of those larger infrastructure funding programs. So this is I want to let people know that we're kind of in a critical moment right now to get $500 million of federal infrastructure funds flowing to communities across Canada. Those funds are actually in danger. We're worried that those funds are going to either be delayed or reallocated elsewhere, unless we maintain the profile and some political pressure on this issue. So I want to invite people to join my newsletter, because next week I'm going to be emailing everybody and letting them know what they can do to kind of rescue this $500 million fund, because there are things that we can do, especially retailers who have a wonderful profile in all of their communities. We also have memberships. A lot of our members are on the call here, like Jamie and Navdeep from Hub Cycling, and also listening in from HLC and Bike Calgary and a few others. So you can also look into kind of joining this federal movement as well by becoming a member of Velo Canada Bikes.
Great. Excellent. That was kind of my closing question there too for you, is how can retailers get involved so they can become members? Kind of stay tuned to your newsletter. Is there a link you might be able to drop in the chat for us?
Yeah.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah, I will be sending something out early next week, something that I need everybody to do to contact your MPs.
Okay, that is our major takeaway. Awesome. Thank you, Samuel. And just in closing, David, if you could share, how can retailers kind of get involved with your organization, or what is the next step they might be able to take there?
Yeah, so I dropped a link in the chat to our e-mobility action center, which has a multitude of resources from model policy to economic impact analysis to insights on how users are, or how adults are using e-bikes. So there's a ton of research and insights there. Jim Bradley's the contact, but please use it, share it, and let us know how we can partner.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And Navdeep, kind of same question for you as well. How can retailers, kind of just engage today, get involved? I did drop a link in there too, to a great article, encourage everyone to read. But yeah, if you could kind of give us a takeaway there.
Definitely. So one thing that is very, very important is that bike shops have their finger on the pulse. They know exactly what customers are concerned about. It could be safety, it could be the cost of bikes or the legislature. So we as cycling advocates advocate for that, but we don't have that finger on the pulse. So if they collaborate with organizations like ours, we can better understand what is it that the community is seeking, and we can work together on this. Another example of that we shared a link in the chat is a partnership we did with the local bike shop in Vancouver called West Point Cycles. And we collaborated to address fallacies that are quite often promoted in the community. It could be that people cycling don't really pay taxes, so they should not be riding on bikes, and things like that. So it was a very successful campaign where we took advantage of our social channels collectively. We created content together, and then we promoted it. So those are some of the ways that local bike shops can work with the advocacy groups.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, and kind of getting ahead of some of those common misconceptions that we hear. And yeah, it sounds like trolling, right? But these are real concerns or real misconceptions people have. So great to have an educated response there too. So thank you so much for everyone. I know we went a little bit over time, but there's so much to get to. Such a great conversation and group of panelists today. So appreciate everyone sharing a little bit extra of their day today and just joining for this conversation, whether you're watching live or viewing the recording. I did just drop in a link to the chat there too, and that is our Canadian Advocacy page. You can actually find that right under community on the nba.com website and right under advocacy. You'll see links to all of the upcoming webinars in this series. Again, April 27th is our next one about e-mobility, battery safety, and recycling. So we'll really dig a lot more into some of the topics we touched on today. Following into our actual in-person summit in Whistler in July. It seems far away. It will be here before we know it. So thank you all so much for coming together today, just making this a shared conversation and really empowering retailers as well to get involved, get engaged, and be part of that conversation. This is about building a stronger, safer, more sustainable future for cycling in Canada, and we appreciate everyone's voice and engagement in this. So thank you so much, everyone. Great. Have a great weekend ahead.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Take care.
people.
Have a good one.